Okay, so the volume seems to be better, so I'm going to try and take advantage of that. I want to talk about a subject I have focused on before and I feel very strongly about, and that is the prevalence of paid Russian bots, trolls, whatever you want to call them, online. You'll excuse me this one cigarette. So basically, I've just watched a BBC Newsnight report, about 5 minutes long, and it's entitled "Is Putin Losing His Grip on Siberia?" And it focuses on the city of Irkutsk, where and it focuses on some of the social demographics going on there. I'll put a link to the article, to the video. Um, and in that particular area, apparently the Communist Party has more support locally than Putin's United Russia. Now, just for the record, I'm no fan of communism. That's, it goes without question. And I certainly don't want to see a communist Russia. So, I certainly wouldn't show much sympathy to their ideology. But I think it is indicative of the fact that this image of Russia, where everyone loves Putin, is not quite the case. Now, it is true that Putin has generally maintained fairly high approval ratings, but Russia, whilst not a single party state, is a state that is deeply, deeply controlled by Putin and his apparatus. Um, so really, anyone else doesn't really have airtime. Putin opponents are physically and violently attacked. Um, there's a very long record of critical journalists making accidents. So Putin runs a very thuggish regime. There's no question about that. Um, and as is often the case in totalitarian regimes, there is a focus on the young. So a few years ago, there was examples of Putin youth camps being run. But I want to talk a little bit about the fact of how these paid bots operate. You see them on any reports. This is a BBC report, so that's the BBC. It's a big enemy, right? So these people will come on and talk about, oh, what about Brexit? What about homelessness in the UK? What about this? What about that? A lot of whataboutery. What you will not see is the same people on Russia Today, RT videos showing any sort of critical analysis of the utter lack of objectivity from RT. Now, I make no secret of my dislike of RT, to put it mildly. I despise RT. I think it's a weapon of the Russian state, and I do think it has been used very cynically to stoke up divisions in the West. Brexit is one example, but there are others. For example, the tensions brought about by mass immigration and other controversial issues. The yellow shirts protest in France, the yellow vests protest recently is just the latest example. Um, RT and the Russian state love this. They absolutely love it. And I wouldn't go so far to say as they're entirely behind it. I think that's a murky area and it's hard to prove. But it would not surprise me if Moscow has tried to get involved in that. Um, what is absolutely true is that RT, as the major, and there's others, but RT will only focus on negative stories in the West. Now, the big contention from Russian nationalists is, oh, the BBC only says negative things. Actually, I thought this report was rather balanced. The reporter did mention positive things, um, but they just put blinkers onto that. They only hear what they want to hear. She interviewed some young communists who don't like Putin. That for me is kind of, well, pot calling the kettle black. Communism is responsible for 100 million deaths in the 20th century. So to pity that these young Russians are looking to communism, I share their contempt of Putin, but communism isn't the answer. Um, anyway, it was just predictable. You look at the comments thread, and it's like some of the names are so dubious. I mean, they're just blatantly made up names, and I think probably a large percentage of them are basically paid bots. That is, people who work in specific facilities in Russia that are actually paid to go online and spread pro-Putin propaganda. And you have something similar in China with people working to spread positive things about the Communist Party whilst vociferously attacking anyone who dares to question it. Both Russia and China use this technique, and unfortunately, I think to some extent they're getting the upper hand in this information war. To be clear here, I'm not saying that I agree with everything the BBC says, far from it, but I think we are in a sort of information war. If there is a new Cold War, it's a digital war and a digital technology information war, and that's potentially more dangerous and complex than the last Cold War. The last Cold War was about spies in murky alleyways and so on. But what we're seeing now is a utilization of technology that is very powerful, very, very powerful. I mean, you look at any RT video, and 99% of the comments, except the few that I have made or a few others, are slavishly praising how wonderful Putin is. Um, there's no critical thinking whatsoever. Now, you go to a BBC video, you're going to see a lot of critical opinions about the BBC, and that's fine. Um, there's one thing that YouTube has introduced recently, and I think it's a very good thing. They have this little caption underneath news videos to state very clearly the source. For example, CBC is a Canadian public broadcasting service. The BBC is a British public broadcasting service. RT is a network with close ties to the Russian government. Absolutely true. It's very good that they're doing this. I don't think it will change the mind of those hardline nationalists who, you know, it's obviously not going to change people's minds, but at least it is there for the record. CGTN is directly controlled by the Chinese Communist Party, or very close links to the Chinese Communist Party is another one. So that's just a few of my thoughts. I feel the worst thing about this is not Russian ultranationals. They're blinded by their love of country. They are ultranationalists. What I think is far worse is those Westerners who are taken in by it. So if you're British, for example, and you're angry with the BBC, you're angry at the government. I mean, I put a poll. I put a poll on a UK political forum earlier, and I asked the open question: What do you think is the greatest external threat to the UK? And several people were putting the EU over the Russian Federation. I find that astonishing, utterly astonishing, because whatever frustrations the EU might cause, and I'm not a lover of the EU, but the simple fact of the matter is the EU has not tried to poison a man on our streets, and therefore putting the wider public at risk. The EU has not launched a massive disinformation campaign using a media network, so-called media network, to do so. So I feel those people, particularly on the Leave side, and I'm not talking about all Leave people who think that Russia is harmless, they're astonishingly naive. They are astonishingly naive, if not just outright useful idiots. And I'm not talking about all Leave people, but I can't comprehend that they would think a powerful state that has shown its hostile intent is harmless, and the European Union is somehow a menacing threat. Um, I understand dislike of the EU. I understand consternation with some of the things the EU does, but there's no rational comparison there. That's my thoughts.